The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched endlessly upward, its crystalline walls catching and refracting the light of 1,000 artificial stars. Elias Venn stood at the center of it all, a lone figure in a simple black suit among beings adorned in ceremonial regalia that proclaimed their power across star systems. The human diplomat's weathered face betrayed nothing as he waited for the council to acknowledge his presence. The Galactic Empire had ruled for 3 millennia, its reach extending across 70% of known space. Earth, that small blue world tucked away in an unfashionable arm of the galaxy, had joined the Council only 5 standard cycles ago. To most here, humanity remained little more than primitive deathworlders who had somehow stumbled into faster-than-light travel. Run, the Empire's first speaker, finally deigned to address him. Its chitinous features arranged themselves into what passed for disdain among its species. Ambassador Venn, you have been summoned to explain your species' disproportionate military response to what was clearly an unfortunate misunderstanding. The chamber hushed. Dozens of species turned their various sensory organs toward the human, expecting stammered apologies or perhaps desperate negotiations. They had seen this performance countless times before from younger races caught in the Empire's gravitational pull. Elias stepped forward, his boots echoing against the polished floor. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of mountains crumbling. You didn't attack a colony. You attacked our home. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient hum of the chamber's environmental systems seemed to pause. Venn, seated to Ren's left, leaned forward with its 6 arms splayed in confusion. Surely you jest. Our fleet's navigation logs clearly show the target was an unauthorized settlement on the edge of contested space. Your logs are wrong. Elias pulled a small device from his pocket and activated it. A hologram bloomed above his palm, showing a blue-green world wrapped in white clouds. This is Earth, homeworld of humanity, birthplace of 8 billion souls. Or rather, this was Earth before your warning shot turned our Pacific coast into glass. The image shifted, showing devastation on a scale that made several council members recoil. Cities reduced to shadows burned into the ground. Forests turned to ash. Oceans boiling under the heat of orbital bombardment. Thales, ancient even by council standards, spoke for the first time in decades. This cannot be. The Empire's protocols explicitly forbid attacks on homeworlds without unanimous council approval. And yet, Elias's voice remained steady, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. 200 million dead. San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle. Cultural treasures accumulated over thousands of years, vaporized in minutes. Children's hospitals, schools, homes where families gathered for evening meals. Ren's mandibles clicked nervously. If this is true, it was certainly unintended. A targeting error. We could discuss reparations. Reparations? The word tasted like ash in Elias's mouth. You speak of reparations while our dead haven't finished burning? Val, the Empire's intelligence coordinator, suddenly stiffened. Data streams flickered across its translucent skin as urgent reports flooded in. First speaker, we're receiving priority communications from 17 frontier sectors. Multiple incidents of simultaneous infrastructure failure. Define incidents, Ren commanded, but its voice had lost some of its earlier arrogance. Supply stations going dark. Communication relays failing in sequence. Shipping lanes reporting navigational hazards. Val's colors shifted to deep purple, a sign of extreme distress. The patterns suggest coordinated action. Elias watched the growing panic with clinical detachment. You're beginning to understand. We didn't mobilize our fleet. We didn't declare war. We simply decided that your empire no longer deserves to function. Impossible, Venn sputtered. The Empire's logistics network spans thousands of systems. No single species could. Who said we acted alone? Elias's smile held no warmth. Every supply depot you strong-armed. Every trade route you monopolized. Every world you've protected into submission. They all remember what it feels like to have a boot on their throat. More reports flooded in. A critical fuel refinery in the Altair system had suffered catastrophic decompression. The main food processing hub for 3 sectors reported contamination across all storage facilities. Military shipyards discovered their construction bays had been precisely targeted, leaving administrative sections untouched but rendering the facilities useless for building or repairing vessels. 63 dead at the Altair refinery, Val reported. All military personnel. Civilian workers were evacuated 18 minutes. Before the incident, precision, Elias confirmed. We learned that from you. Target only what matters. Leave the innocent when possible. Though you seem to forget that lesson when you glassed our coastline. Thali's weathered form trembled. You're dismantling the Empire's ability to project power. We're removing your ability to hurt anyone else. Elias activated another display. This one showed shipping routes, trade networks, communication grids, all beginning to fail in a carefully orchestrated cascade. Your empire runs on fear and efficiency. Remove the efficiency, and the fear becomes worthless. Rin slammed the appendage against its podium. This is an act of war against hundreds of sovereign systems. No, Elias corrected. This is the consequence of attacking Earth. War implies we seek conquest. We seek only one thing, ensuring you never have the capability to make such a mistake again. The chamber erupted as more dire reports poured in. Member worlds of the Empire, sensing weakness, began announcing their withdrawal from mutual defense pacts. Trading partners suspended agreements. Military outposts found themselves isolated as supply chains ground to a halt. Val's data streams showed cascading system failures. The Corvin shipyards, the Nexus Prime communication array, the Central Command backup facilities, all experiencing critical failures within minutes of each other. Meteors, Elias explained calmly, accelerated to significant fractions of light speed, guided with pinpoint accuracy. No explosives needed, pure kinetic energy. We call them rods from God. Meteors? Ven's disbelief was palpable. You're destroying our infrastructure with rocks? Humanity spent 50,000 years throwing rocks at our enemies before we reached the stars. We've gotten very good at it. Elias's expression hardened. Did you think we'd forgotten our roots? That becoming spacefaring would make us less dangerous? You attacked our home. Our actual home. The place where our children take their first steps, where we bury our dead, where we keep the memories of all we've ever been. The hologram shifted again, showing more targets being eliminated with surgical precision. No massive fleet battles. No invasion forces. Just critical infrastructure ceasing to exist in flashes of kinetic destruction. Thali's ancient voice carried resignation. How long have you been planning this? Since the day we joined your council, Elias admitted. We hoped we'd never need it. We wanted to believe the galaxy had moved beyond might making right. Your attack on Earth proved otherwise. You couldn't have done this alone, Rin insisted. Our intelligence would have detected such massive preparation. Your intelligence looks for fleets massing, armies mobilizing obvious threats. It doesn't notice small survey ships mapping asteroid trajectories. It ignores mining operations, stockpiling resources. It overlooks trade negotiations that slowly position assets exactly where they need to be. Val's reports grew increasingly desperate. Military commanders found themselves unable to coordinate responses as communication networks fragmented. Supply officers watched helplessly as automated systems rejected override commands. Entire sectors of the Empire's power grid began controlled shutdowns. You're not trying to conquer us, Vin realized with growing horror. You're making us irrelevant. Conquest requires occupation, administration, the burden of empire. Elias shook his head. We want none of that. We simply want you to understand what you've awakened. Another wave of reports flooded in. 3 major shipyards reported simultaneous failures in their fabrication systems. The Empire's primary training academy experienced a complete lockdown of its tactical simulation networks. Banking systems serving military contractors began displaying critical errors. Your weapons platforms remain untouched, Elias noted. Your warships still have power. But what good are weapons without supplies? What use are warships that can't be refueled or repaired? You built an empire on the assumption that your infrastructure was too vast to threaten. We've proven that assumption false. Ren's composure finally cracked. What do you want? Terms? Surrender? Tribute? We want you to remember. Elias's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, yet it carried to every corner of the chamber. Remember that you attacked Earth. Remember that we could have retaliated with the same brutality you showed us. Remember that we chose precision over massacre. And remember that this capability doesn't go away just because we stop using it. Thales managed a grim laugh. You've turned our own systems against us. Used our interconnectedness as a weapon. The greatest empires in human history fell not to external conquest, but to internal collapse, Elias replied. We simply accelerated a process that was already inevitable. Your empire was dying of its own arrogance. We just pulled the plug. The tactical displays showed accelerating chaos. Member worlds, sensing the empire's paralysis, began reclaiming resources that had been commandeered for military use. Corporate entities terminated contracts. Regional governors declared autonomy. Make it stop, Vin pleaded. We'll pay reparations. We'll make amends. The responsible parties will be punished. Elias turned to leave. It's already stopping. Every kinetic strike was precisely calculated. Every system failure carefully timed. In approximately 6 hours, the cascade will be complete. Your empire won't be conquered. It will simply cease to function as a cohesive entity. Wait. Ren's voice cracked with desperation. You can't just leave. There must be negotiations. Terms. Elias paused at the chamber's exit. Terms? Your empire attacked our home and killed 200 million humans. In response, we've killed fewer than 1,000 of your military personnel while dismantling your ability to ever threaten another world. Those are the only terms that matter. The human ambassador disappeared through the doorway, leaving chaos in his wake. Council members turned on each other, demanding explanations, assigning blame, scrambling to salvage what they could from the unfolding disaster. 48 hours later, the Galactic Empire effectively ceased to exist, not through conquest or occupation, but through the systematic removal of every mechanism that allowed it to project power beyond individual star systems. Supply chains lay shattered. Communication networks operated at pre-FTL efficiency. Military academies found their databases corrupted with surgical precision, leaving historical records intact, but erasing tactical doctrines developed over millennia. Elias returned to the council chambers one final time. The grand hall that had once hosted hundreds of species now held barely a dozen. Rin sat alone at the central podium, its elaborate ceremonial garments replaced by simple civilian attire. You've destroyed everything, the former first speaker accused. Millions will suffer from the chaos you've created. Millions were already suffering under your rule, Elias countered. The difference is that now they have a choice about their future. Ben approached hesitantly. The member worlds are demanding trials. They want someone to blame for the Empire's fall. The Empire fell because it forgot the first rule of power. Legitimacy comes from consent, not force. Elias surveyed the nearly empty chamber. You ruled through fear for 3,000 years. That fear evaporated the moment your subjects realized you could no longer enforce it. Thales, looking somehow younger despite its ancient frame, spoke up. Many worlds are looking to humanity for leadership. They see you as liberators. Then, they misunderstand our actions. Elias's voice carried a warning. We didn't do this to lead. We did it to teach. The galaxy doesn't need another empire. It needs to learn that actions have consequences. Ren's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. You've created a power vacuum. The chaos will last generations. Creation often follows destruction. Elias pulled up one final hologram. It showed Earth, scarred but rebuilding, cities rising from ashes, green returning to burned forests. We know something about recovering from devastation. Perhaps the galaxy will learn as well. The former first speaker slumped in defeat. What happens now? Now, Individual worlds decide their own fates. Trade agreements get negotiated between equals. Defense pacts form for mutual benefit rather than coercion. Elias deactivated the display, and everyone remembers that humanity knows how to throw rocks. As he prepared to leave, Val made one last observation. Your intelligence services. They were planning this from the beginning. Every human trade delegation, every cultural exchange, every diplomatic mission. They were all gathering intelligence. Elias smiled, the first genuine expression he'd shown since arriving. We're a young species by galactic standards, but we're very good at learning from history, both ours and yours. He walked toward the exit, then paused one final time. The Empire thought it was teaching us our place in the galaxy. Instead, you taught us that we already knew it. We're not conquerors. We're not rulers. We're simply very good at ending threats to our home. The chamber doors closed behind him with finality. In the silence that followed, the remaining council members contemplated the ruins of their once mighty empire. Not conquered by superior firepower or overwhelmed by massive fleets, but methodically dismantled by a species they had dismissed as primitive. On Earth, Elias stood before the memorial erected for the 200 million lost in the attack. Names covered every surface, extending deep underground and reaching toward the sky. He placed a hand on the cool stone and spoke quietly to the dead. They thought they could erase us. Instead, we erased their empire. The sun set over the Pacific, its light dancing on waters that had once boiled under orbital bombardment. In the distance, construction crews worked to rebuild what had been lost. But the scars would remain, intentionally preserved as a reminder. Above, the stars shone with deceptive peace. Somewhere among them, the former galactic empire's constituent worlds were learning to navigate a universe without the certainty of overwhelming force. Trade routes reopened cautiously. Diplomatic missions proceeded with unprecedented respect for sovereignty. Military vessels found themselves repurposed for exploration and defense rather than intimidation. The galaxy had learned a fundamental truth about humanity. Not that they were warlike or vengeful, but that they possessed something far more dangerous: the patience to plan, the precision to execute, and the wisdom to know when overwhelming force was less effective than calculated dismantlement. In the months that followed, numerous species approached Earth with proposals for alliance, trade, and mutual defense. Humanity's response remained consistent. Cooperation, yes. Domination, never. They had seen what empire brought, and they wanted no part of it. The Galactic Council reconvened 6 months later in a modest facility, its grandiose chambers abandoned for practical meeting spaces. Representatives spoke as equals, no longer divided between imperial powers and subject worlds. When contentious issues arose, someone would inevitably mention Earth's example, not as a threat, but as a reminder that even the mightiest structures could fall to precisely aimed stones. Thales, now serving as a mediator rather than an imperial elder, often reflected on humanity's actions. They hadn't sought to rule or even to punish beyond what was necessary. They had simply removed the capacity for tyranny and left the galaxy to find its own path forward. The humans call it tough love, Thales explained to younger diplomats. They dismantled our empire not from hate, but from a determination that such power should never again threaten peaceful worlds. The former empire's military academies, their tactical databases mysteriously corrupted, found themselves reimagining their purpose. Without the accumulated strategies of conquest, they rebuilt their curricula around defense, exploration, and peacekeeping. It would take generations to develop new doctrines, and perhaps that was the point. Trade flourished in the power vacuum, but it was different now. Negotiations proceeded between equals. Contracts included escape clauses. No single entity controlled vital resources or routes. The inefficiency frustrated some, but the freedom it brought was worth the cost. Years passed. The scars on Earth healed, though memorials ensured the attack would never be forgotten. Human ships traveled the galaxy, but they carried teachers, traders, and healers more often than soldiers. When conflict arose, they offered mediation backed by the unspoken reminder that they had once dismantled the greatest empire in galactic history with precisely targeted rocks. A decade after the Empire's fall, Elias returned to space one final time. Age had turned his hair white and etched deeper lines into his face, but his eyes remained sharp. He stood before a gathering of young diplomats from dozens of worlds, all studying at the newly established Galactic Institute for Peaceful Coexistence. The Empire fell in 48 hours, he told them, but had been dying for centuries. We simply revealed its weakness. True strength doesn't come from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to build, from the courage to trust, from the humility to acknowledge that no species, no matter how powerful, has the right to determine another's fate. A young Altarian raised a tentacle. But you determined the Empire's fate. Wasn't that the same thing? Elias smiled. We removed their ability to determine others' fates. There's a difference. The Empire still existed after our action. Its member worlds, its people, its resources, all intact. They simply lost the mechanisms of oppression. What they did with that freedom was their choice. And if another empire rises, asked a Nexary student, then perhaps they'll remember what happened to the last one. Elias looked out the viewport at the stars. Humanity doesn't seek to police the galaxy, but we've demonstrated that we can dismantle tyranny when it threatens our home. That knowledge itself is often enough. The lesson concluded, and the students dispersed to their various worlds, carrying with them the story of how humanity had changed the galaxy not through conquest, but through carefully applied consequences. They would become the next generation of leaders, shaped by an understanding that power without accountability was ultimately hollow. On Earth, children learned about the great dismantling in history classes. They studied not just the tactical brilliance of the operation, but the restraint shown in its execution. Teachers emphasized that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in choosing precisely what to preserve and what to eliminate. The memorial to the 200 million victims became a pilgrimage site, not just for humans, but for beings from across the galaxy. They came to understand the weight of the loss that had prompted humanity's response. Many left with a deeper appreciation for the measured nature of that response, given the devastation that had triggered it. In the former imperial capital, Rin lived quietly as a private citizen. The rage and humiliation had faded over time, replaced by a grudging understanding. The Empire had created the conditions for its own downfall. Humanity had simply chosen the timing and method. Val, whose intelligence networks had so spectacularly failed to predict humanity's capabilities, now taught at a multi-species university. Its courses focused on understanding rather than controlling other cultures. The greatest intelligence failure, it often said, is assuming you know everything about those you consider inferior. Thales continued to serve as an elder voice in galactic affairs, but with a fundamentally different perspective. The humans taught us that empire is not the natural end state of civilization, it would explain. They showed us that distributed power, messy and inefficient as it might be, creates a more resilient and just galaxy. The psychological impact of humanity's action resonated far beyond the immediate political changes. Species that had resigned themselves to eternal subjugation discovered they had choices. Worlds that had built their entire identities around imperial service found new purposes. The galaxy, freed from the weight of enforced hierarchy, began to explore what cooperation without coercion might achieve. 20 years after the Empire's fall, humanity proposed the creation of the Galactic Confederation, a loose alliance based on mutual benefit rather than centralized power. The charter explicitly prohibited any member from controlling critical resources or infrastructure that affected multiple worlds. Disputes would be resolved through mediation, with enforcement mechanisms that targeted capabilities rather than populations. The signing ceremony took place in the restored council chambers, now serving as a museum and meeting place. Representatives from over 1,000 worlds attended, including many that had once been core imperial territories. Elias, now ancient by human standards but still sharp of mind, gave the opening address. We gather not to create another empire, but to ensure one never rises again. Let this confederation be built on trust earned, not fear imposed. Let its strength come from the voluntary participation of equals, not the submission of subjects. And let us remember that the greatest security lies not in overwhelming force, but in the mutual benefit of all. The charter was signed without fanfare or grandiose displays of power. It was a document born from the ashes of empire, shaped by the lesson that true authority comes from consent and cooperation rather than compulsion. As the ceremony concluded, Elias found himself standing once more before the viewing wall, looking out at the stars. A young human diplomat approached, full of questions about those pivotal events decades ago. "Were you ever tempted to do more?" she asked. "To take control, to shape the galaxy according to our vision?" Elias chuckled, the sound carrying years of wisdom. Every species faces that temptation when they discover they have power over others. The true test of civilization is not whether you can conquer, but whether you choose not to. But we did conquer in a way. We destroyed their empire. We destroyed their ability to oppress. There's a profound difference. He turned from the stars to face her. We didn't tell them how to live. We simply ensured they couldn't force others to live under their rule. What they built from that freedom was their choice. The young diplomat considered this. And if they had chosen to rebuild their empire, then they would have learned that we still remember how to throw rocks. Elias's smile held both warmth and warning. But they didn't. Most beings, given the choice, prefer freedom to domination. The empire only survived as long as it did because that choice was taken away. As night fell over the former imperial capital, now a vibrant center of interspecies cooperation, the lights of thousands of vessels traced paths between the stars. They carried not armies but traders, not conquerors but explorers, not overlords but partners in a galaxy learning to thrive without the shadow of empire. In the memorial gardens on Earth, new sections have been added over the years, not for victims of war, but to commemorate those who had worked to prevent future conflicts. Elias's name would join them eventually, remembered not as a warrior, but as an architect of lasting peace. The galaxy had learned the lesson humanity taught, not through words or treaties, but through the precise application of consequence to action. The Empire had attacked Earth, humanity's home. In response, humanity had not sought revenge or conquest. They had simply ensured such an attack could never happen again to anyone. As the years turned to decades and decades to centuries, the story of the great dismantling became legend, then myth, then a foundational truth of galactic civilization. Species might rise and fall, technologies might advance beyond recognition, but the fundamental lesson remained. Power without accountability inevitably fails, and those who forget this truth do so at their peril. Humanity never sought to rule the galaxy. They simply made it clear that they would protect their home with calculated precision rather than blind rage. In doing so, they had transformed the very nature of galactic politics, proving that the most profound changes often come not from those who seek power, but from those who know when and how to remove it from others. The stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the affairs of the beings who traveled between them. But those beings had learned something fundamental about consequences, about home, and about the dangerous wisdom of a species that had spent 50,000 years perfecting the art of throwing stones. And in that learning, the galaxy found a peace more lasting than any empire could have imposed. Earth stood as a reminder, scarred but unbroken, rebuilt but not forgotten. Its message echoed across the cosmos. We are here. This is our home, and we will protect it with a precision that makes conquest pale beside consequence. The galaxy had learned, and in learning, it had grown beyond the need for empires, beyond the cycle of domination and rebellion, into something newer and perhaps better. All because humanity had chosen to teach a lesson rather than claim a throne, to dismantle rather than dominate, to throw stones with such precision that the very concept of empire became obsolete. In the end, That was humanity's greatest victory. Not the fall of the Galactic Empire, but the rise of a galaxy that no longer needed one.